Are we live right now?
Yes, through Facebook.
Okay.
So we'll begin in a minute.
Okay.
So is there anything you want to know before we start?
Uh,
How many have you done these Zoom meetings before?
the first one about the love languages.
Oh yes, yeah, I remember that. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, however, the first one uh, was a little short
Right.
because I didn't have any questions or I had
Yeah.
just one. So, but now I have several. So it's been going. It's been running 30 minutes now. So at least 30 minutes. There was one that ran an hour,
Okay.
but yeah, at least 30 to 45 minutes. So,
Okay. All right.
so how do you, okay, so it is 11 o'clock and let's begin now.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hamza Reed, and I am the Director of Operations here at the Multicultural Center. And I'd like to welcome all of you to our Family First Center weekly webinar. This webinar happens every Wednesday at 11 a.m. The format will consist of a short presentation followed by a few question and answer sessions at the end, where we will field questions from the audience down in the chat box below. And also, if you're watching through Facebook, you guys have a chat box also that you can ask questions with. Today's topic is going to be conflict resolution, and it will be presented by Sister Saima Hussani. A little info about Sister Saima. She's a licensed professional counselor and supervisor who's earned her master's degree in educational counseling with advanced clinical coursework and training. She has years of experience working as a psychotherapist in Katy and now has her own private practice. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Sister Saima.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Um, Again, we've done these over the weeks, and I think these are very helpful for the community just to gain insight, awareness, different topics that we cover, just helping people with mental health issues socially, within families and everything. So, another one that I wanted to talk about today, especially these days with a pandemic going on. We're kind of cooped up at home and tensions might be running high. So I think there's a lot of stress. And because of stress, there often occurs conflict. And, we face different forms of conflict in various aspects of our lives, within our families, with friends, coworkers, and it's bound to happen. It's in the natural flow of things. But how do we address it and how do we resolve it is a key thing I think is important to understand, how to manage conflict, how to handle it, how to minimize it, how to avoid it if we can. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And it encompasses different kinds of resolution skills. It's learning how to be assertive versus being aggressive. We don't want to feel like we're attacking somebody. So that's why we want to speak our mind and state our emotions and thoughts assertively, respectfully, but again, making it clear and to the point. How to mediate, how to have empathy, how to have active listening skills. All of these things are things that are key elements in healthy conflict resolution skills. And we're going to talk more as we go through the presentation today. Um, so, what is conflict resolution? Basically, it's a process for two or more people to find a peaceful solution to a disagreement or some sort of a misunderstanding. It happens, like I said, and it's important to be able to hear the other person's point of view. It's important to be able to understand and be clear on what we want to communicate to the other person without becoming disrespectful, aggressive, using, harsh language, these kinds of things we want to avoid. So that's what we're going to talk about. And again, like I said, conflict occurs within our personal relationships, our professional relationships. Emotional things come up. It can be regarding financial issues between two people. So these are various things that conflict can result from. So like I said, it arises when individuals have differing values, opinions, or needs, and are unable to effectively communicate those points of view. Those clashes arise due to differences in thoughts, in their thought process, in their attitude or perceptions about things. We tend to be very kind of, about our own views. We have a way of expressing them, and if we don't do it effectively, it can lead to conflict. Ego gets in the way sometimes. There's misunderstandings, and then that leads to negative reactions. So let's talk about anger a little bit. Anger is kind of like that secondary emotion or secondary response that comes out. And if you look at this image here about the anger iceberg, I like to present that to my clients because it's a great way to depict what anger is. Anger is really the surface. And if you think of an iceberg, it's like that top part of the iceberg that's coming up above the water. It's the anger. But underneath it, there's a whole structure of all these different emotions that are happening that's provoking that anger, that's leading to that conflict. So it's important to not just express the anger, but to really understand why am I feeling so angry? What's really being triggered here? What's hitting that nerve that's making me react with that anger externally? So there's basically 3 basic fears that kind of fuel anger. One of them is a fear of loss of control. Whenever we feel like we're losing control over ourselves, over a situation, over somebody, we feel frustrated and we don't know sometimes how to handle that, and we react with anger. So that's one basic element that fuels that anger. The second one is a fear of losing face. What that means is basically when we feel humiliated or we feel ridiculed or embarrassed by somebody or a situation, that upsets us, and we then react with anger. So that's the second thing that oftentimes drives that anger emotion. And then finally, there's a fear of abandonment, which basically refers to feeling alone, feeling like nobody's got my back, nobody's supporting me, nobody understands me. I'm here on my own. And that's a scary feeling, to feel like you're all alone. And so that can also lead to feelings of anger coming out second, on top. So what I often tell my clients is that when they feel angry, and anger is a natural emotion, we all get angry sometimes. Things upset us, situations, people say and do things that make us upset. That's fine. The problem occurs when anger becomes too frequent and too intense. And that's when we have to think about, okay, what is going on here? Why am I constantly going from 0 to 100, immediately? What is it that's really underneath this anger that's really hitting me each time I blow my top? And these are the things that I often encourage them to think about. Like, what are you feeling? What kind of a fear are you feeling that's leading to that reaction? So that's one of the main things I wanted to emphasize about anger, which often leads to that conflict. So like I said, anger leads to the conflict. It's basically our fight or flight response. As human beings, we have that built in. It's our stress response system. It's there for a purpose. It's there to protect us, to make us feel protected and safe from a potential threat that we see. That could be somebody or a situation. And that's our tendency to defend ourselves. So it's there for a purpose, and we can use it for that purpose. But like I said, if it's used too frequently and it becomes too intense, that's a problem. If you find yourself in conflict a lot, we have to think about what's going on here. And again, with conflict, when you get into arguments and you gotta have those, back and forths, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't lead to anybody. Nobody wins. And it can cause, it leads to further disrespect, and, unnecessary tensions remain. So you have to ask yourself, like, how does this benefit me? This fight, is this really going to help me? Is this really going to solve anything? So instead of focusing and really kind of, honing in on that problem and we keep talking about the problem, let's talk about what's the solution. Is there a solution? Can we reach some sort of an agreement? So that's where I emphasize using more of a solutions focused approach when resolving anger or conflict. So there's different phases of conflict. There's a prelude to the conflict, which is basically, whatever has been brewing, what's been kind of festering over time, things that have been there, whether it's differences in culture, whether it's differences in ideologies or viewpoints, and all of these things, events that have happened in the past that never were addressed or resolved. So these are things that are like the prelude. They lead up to things, and it's kind of festering, it's growing, and it's brewing. And then there's a triggering event. Something happens, something is said, whether it's or something, there's some sort of a behavior that's seen, like there's some sort of a tone of voice, a nonverbal cue that somebody sees, and that triggers them because it's, like I said, it's been brewing and it's been piling over time. So then it just takes that something that happened in that instant to trigger it. So I wanted to talk a little bit, and I want to kind of sidetrack a little bit about trigger events. So I'm going to go to the next slide real quick and come back to this. So basically, when something happens, we immediately have a reaction to it. Okay, that's why it's called a trigger. And this is where I also encourage clients to kind of take a moment and pause and think about what's going on when that trigger is happening. And that's what I call, in CBT or cognitive behavior therapy, that's referred to as thought reframing. And these are like the ABCs to how to do that. So A obviously stands for the activating event or the trigger. So something happens and we react to it, okay? When we react to it, there's a belief, B for belief, which is basically, for most of us, generally, it's an automatic negative thought. Something happens, we feel a certain about, we think something about that. We think a negative thought about what's just going on, which leads to a consequence or a feeling. Then we feel sad, we feel angry, we feel anxious. All of these negative emotions start to kind of develop. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. So let's say, for example, there's an activating event, like, let's take a couple, for example. Spouse comes home from a long day at work. It's been a rough day. They're not in the best of moods. They come home, the other spouse says hello, and the other person just ignores them and goes to the room. So the spouse that was at home might be thinking, that's the belief, they're thinking, what happened? What did I do? Why are they mad at me? Did I do something wrong? And so all of these thoughts, automatically negative thoughts, are kind of starting to, fill their minds, which are now they're thinking this. So they're going to start having certain feelings, which is like, they're going to start feeling upset. They're going to start maybe feeling frustrated on their own, thinking, well, what did I do? I didn't do anything. Why are they not talking to me? Why didn't I get a response when they came home? So already you see how there's this prelude developing for this potential conflict because of this automatic trigger that has led to these negative feelings, right? So what we want to do is D, which is dispute those ants, which I refer to as those automatic negative thoughts. What do you want to do in that dispute process is you go back to that belief and you say, okay, wait a second. Why am I thinking this? Why am I automatically going to that my spouse who just came home is upset with me? What is my basis for that? What is my evidence? Did we argue earlier? Did I say something that may have been upsetting? And if your answer is no, then you have to kind of base your thoughts in reality and be logical about it and not jump to those conclusions. So when you're doing that, you're able to then kind of talk yourself down, then reevaluate those negative feelings. And then, ideally those negative feelings subside and you're back to more rational, balanced thoughts and feelings. So that's what thought reframing and how to kind of step back from that trigger and think about it can help to avoid conflict before it even happens. All right, so back to that. So that's, second phase of the conflict is the triggering event, which I just went over. Then comes the initiation phase. So let's say, a lot of us, in the moment, it's hard to think and process, and that's what we have to kind of train ourselves to do. But as human beings, we react, we say things and do things that in the heat of the moment, we regret afterwards. So, the third phase is the initiation phase, is where in the heat of the moment, negative things are said. There's heated argument, there's maybe abusive language, there's disagreement, which means that the conflict is on, the fight has begun. So that's that third phase of the conflict. Then the differentiation phase is basically where, we're saying things, we're voicing our differences to each other, we're blaming, we're criticizing, and all of that is happening through this phase. So that's basically what the phases of conflict look like. And then eventually, obviously we want to get to the resolution phase where we are a little bit calmer, we can calm down and address like, okay, so this is what's happened. Do we want to keep focusing on that, or do we want to work towards some resolution and solution? And again, like I said earlier, like the solution focused approach comes in over here. And we went over that. Conflict avoidance. So like I said, conflict is going to happen, right? That's just something natural. But if we can avoid it or minimize it, it's probably better, because like I said, it doesn't really lead to anything constructive if you're getting yourself into conflict a lot of the times. So ways to do that is really ask yourself, how will this benefit me in the long run if I continue to not keep control of my emotions and I lose control and I lose my temper and get into that conflict with a person? Is this going to be productive in any way? Probably not. So it's best to learn how to control your emotions. Don't try not to overreact to given situations. Always try to remember that there is another side to it. Try to think about maybe there's something going on with that other person, that it's not just all about you, what other factors are at play. So those are ways to kind of step back and think about what's going on and how to control your emotions. Basically, and then being a good and patient listener really is important, about listening to what the other person has to say. Only give your comments to the situation when you've heard and really understood what that person is saying. We talked once about, effective listening and what that looks like. Really kind of restating and understanding, okay, this is what I heard you say, is that correct? Making sure you're not making assumptions. So really trying to be a good and patient listener, waiting for the other person to finish speaking before jumping in. Oftentimes, we listen to respond and we don't really listen to hear. So we really want to practice listening to hear what the other person is saying. Trying to be flexible, trying to, have an understanding, not being so rigid in your view, being able to adapt and be willing to compromise is important. Like I said, think before you speak, very important. I often tell people that, if you're feeling that anger building up inside of you, rather than just reacting to it immediately, I tell them to follow 4 basic things. Just stop yourself from that reaction. Don't fall into it. Don't let yourself go there. Breathe, do some breathing exercises, calming exercises, use mindfulness techniques to calm yourself down. So you can come back to a calmer place before so that prevents you from reacting. And then think about what is it, why am I getting so upset? What's triggering me? Go back to those, that anger iceberg. What is beneath that anger that's really making me feel reactive here? And once you've done that, take a moment. It's okay to step away, and it's okay to tell that person, you know what, I need a minute. I need to just go take a walk, go outside, go to the other room, and I need to just calm down. And that's a completely healthy thing to do in interaction. And then come back and then respond and address, okay, this is what I was feeling. This is how what was going on was affecting me. Make it about yourself. Don't put it on the other person. We always want to use those I feel statements, like I felt hurt when XYZ, versus saying, well, you always this and you never that, because that makes the person defensive. Okay. So think before you speak, basically. And like I said, those effective communication skills, listening to others' viewpoints, opinions, validating them. Oftentimes when we get into conflict, the other person's talking and we always say, yeah, okay, but no, that's not what, And so the minute you say no, you invalidate everything that person was just saying. You want to hear them. You want to listen to what they're saying and say, okay, I hear what you're saying, but let me try to explain what I was doing in that moment. So it's a healthy back and forth. not just like, well, no, that's not right. That's not what I was saying, because that doesn't lead to anything. That invalidates what the other person was feeling and saying. And then at the end, if you're wrong about something, if you overreacted or you misinterpreted something, admit it. It's okay. It's not a, power trip to say that I was wrong. I'm sorry. I misunderstood or I misheard. Acknowledge it when you're wrong. Be able to say, I'm sorry. That doesn't mean you're weak or you were, unable, it's just basically being able to admit it, and it makes you gain respect in the other person's eyes when you're able to admit if something was wrong on your end. Okay. All right. Conflict management skills, or basically, like I said, are those listening skills, being respectful, being mindful of how you're presenting and saying things, the language you're using, like I said, clarifying, repeating, reiterating. Those are all things that we need to do to make sure that what we're hearing is what's being said, what we're hearing is what's being intended to be understood in that certain way. So that's very important, those listening skills. Discussion, a healthy back and forth, being able to say, respectfully about, trying to be precise about different things that you're hearing, having that discussion and saying that, well, this is my understanding of what you're saying. Please clarify if I'm wrong. Help me understand. This is, using those clarifying statements. Again, showing patience, be willing to, not just jump in, give the other person time to talk. And then not being impartial. It's important when you're maybe in a group of people and two other people are having a conflict and you're maybe a third person, try to be impartial. If one is a friend of yours and one isn't, somebody that you know very well, don't just automatically get on board with your friend just because they're your friend. Try to keep a balanced outlook. It's important to, be true to your beliefs and what you feel is true and what you hold value to, because you don't want to just jump on board on one side for whatever reason, because you feel you have to, or because there's some sense of obligation. You want to try to be impartial and be fair in your views as well. Again, like I said earlier, try not to be critical, try not to hit below the belt. Those kinds of things don't lead to anything or any kind of resolution. It just increases the conflict. And then trying to maintain a positive attitude. Basically, you want to just, approach somebody, even if you have something that you want to address. Maybe for example, at the workplace, you have an employee that isn't really doing what they need to be doing according to their job. Rather than just coming at them and saying, look, this is what you need to do, this is what you're doing wrong. Be positive in the sense that, what, I really appreciate the way you do this, this, and that. Appreciate them for what they do right. But then you say, but you know what, there's some other areas where I think we can work on. And again, make it inclusive. Don't just be critical, like you're doing this or you're not doing that, because then that person becomes defensive and the communication shuts down right there. If we make our language more inclusive, like, what can we do to make this situation better? Help me understand what you feel and let me get your thoughts on it. It's more inclusive language. So that helps the person feel motivated to make a change and make things better around themselves. So with conflict resolution, when you have the conflict, basically you want to define the source of conflict. Look beyond the cause, because like I said, the trigger is just that one event that's happened, that's kind of maybe initiated the actual conflict to happening. What's the source though? Like, what's been happening in the background? Is there things that have been brewing, or are there things that have been brewing? Is there a history there of some sort? Is there negativity? Are there things that have been left unresolved? So really trying to understand the source of the conflict and what's really at the root of it. Because if you address just the event, something may again happen and trigger it, and then we'll have conflict all over again. So you have to really go to the root of what's going on each time. And that's, like I said, look beyond the incident. It's not just the incident, it's what's underneath that's been kind of happening. Requesting solutions, basically talking about, after getting each other's viewpoints, you're like, okay, well, so now we've identified the problem. So what do we want to do about it? being an active listener. How can we make things better between the two of us, or in a workplace environment, or whatever the situation might be? Looking for those solutions, looking to have, getting brainstorming towards ideas of working through the process, rather than just keeping, focused on like this went wrong, and this went wrong, and this went wrong. Like I said, we've identified that, we're in it, but what do we want to do about it now? And again, once you're able to do that, make sure both parties are in agreement. They both acknowledge it and they're willing to work with it. You don't want to feel like you're being pressured into a solution, because then that doesn't really solve the conflict, because there's like that sense of obligation, like, oh, well, I guess I have to listen now because nobody's listening to me. That's not resolving. True resolution really happens when both parties are saying, okay, you know what, I'm willing to compromise this much, I'm willing to go here, and that's fair, and I feel comfortable with that. That's what we also refer to as healthy boundaries, like what's okay with me, and I'm willing to go this far, but I'm not willing to go beyond that. That's healthy, setting healthy boundaries. And I always tell patients or clients that the way to really understand the difference between healthy boundaries and compromise versus, having to like be made to do something, is that sense of like, when you're willing to compromise, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm okay with that. That's good. And that's when you set that boundary and you're comfortable with it, versus thinking and feeling, well, I guess I'll do it because I have to. That sense of obligation is that gauge for you to sense that, okay, this is not resolved for me. I'm still not okay with this. So it's really important to be mindful of how you're feeling about the resolution process, and how you feel about the agreement and understanding. Is it really truly agreeable to you? So be aware of that. So the Gottman method, basically, this is meant for couples, but it can really be applied in a lot of situations. The Gottman method is really something that's important that we use in couples therapy. It's from doctors John and Julie Gottman, who are, the front runners in marriage and family counseling. They do a lot of research and work with couples, and this is something that they've come up with, which is really beneficial for people. They call it the 4 horsemen of relationships that you want to avoid. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are things you want to avoid when having interactions in relationships. So first one, of course, criticism. We don't want to be critical towards each other. Like I said, when you come out with verbiage like, you always this, you never that, those very absolute words like everything, no one, always, are very encompassing, and it doesn't mean that if sometimes something happens that it's every single time something happens, so you want to avoid language like that when talking to each other. And like I said, when you come at it as criticism, the other person, they're done, they're not listening, they don't want to hear it. So avoiding that. And the ways to avoid that is using the language like we talked earlier, like, I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling dismissed. Talk about what you're feeling in that situation, not about what they're doing, because you're feeling what you're feeling, that's there, that's real. So focus on that and express that and help them understand what their actions are kind of leading you to feel. Contempt is another one that we want to avoid, because when we get to a level of contempt, which is just sheer anger, we say a lot of things that are abusive. We throw insults, and that is never healthy. So we don't obviously want to get to that point. So don't let yourself in a relationship or any interaction get to a point where you're out there becoming verbally abusive, aggressive, insulting to the other person, because that's going to get you nowhere. Defensiveness. Basically, we feel defensive when we are being attacked. So a way to kind of step back from that and think about that is that if I'm becoming defensive, okay, that's fine, that's happening, but what is it that, what part am I playing? Can I take some ownership in this? Am I playing a role in this conflict as well? Acknowledging your role can also help the other party calm down a little bit, saying, okay, you know what? I see your point. I see I can become this way or that way, and I own that, and I'm willing to hear you, and let's see if we can make things better. So avoiding defensiveness and trying to take some ownership of your own actions as well can help in the conflict process, the conflict resolution process. And then finally, stonewalling, which basically refers to that point when, you're emotionally flooded and tensions are running too high and nothing's going to be resolved at that point. So when we stonewalled, we want to just withdraw to avoid conflict from going any further. This is where I encourage people to take those 4 steps: the stop, think, or the stop, breathe, think, and respond. Because when you're feeling that emotionally flooded, you want to just walk away and think about how to calm yourself down. And then when you're ready, whether it's in an hour, whether it's the next day, to go back and readdress it. I often also tell my, clients that are couples or just, even individuals, that it's good to have an understanding amongst the people that you're close to, that, if you have a tendency to get upset quickly, if you're triggered easily, first of all, examine that. Secondly, have an understanding between people that are around you that, what, if I walk away, if I say, have a code word or something, say, what, time out, pause, whatever. And that signals the other person that, what, we're going to table this for now. I'm going to go to the other room. I'm going to go for a drive or a walk. And that's not that I'm walking out on you, that I don't want to have to hear what you want to say, or I'm turning my back on you. That's nothing like that. It's just that I need that for myself. I need to go and calm myself down. So it's important to have that understanding. And when you feel that emotional flooding happening, rather than having, feeling stonewalled, you walk away, and you come back. And that's even more important, is to come back and then address it, because without addressing it, it's just going to be swept under the rug and nothing's ever going to change. And then there's going to be another conflict down the road and everything's going to come back up again. So walk away, but then come back and readdress. So these are some ways to think about conflict. Like I said, it happens. We all get upset. It's a natural human emotion, but you really want to learn how to manage it better, how to resolve it, minimize conflict if you can, and handle it in a healthy and effective manner, and learn how to communicate better with each other, especially in these times where we're kind of, restricted in so many ways. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of frustration. The fuse is short. People are struggling. And families are, parents with kids, spouses. There's a lot of stress these days. So it's a good thing to think about, of how we can handle, these different pressures we're dealing with. Job uncertainty, school, homeschooling. How do we deal with this? We're having to have our kids at home, and we're working, and the kids are trying to figure out school with everything going on. So plus, and just everything in the environment right now that's been happening is very difficult to deal with. So it's like the perfect storm for a lot of conflict that's occurring right now between people. So I think it's really important to learn how to manage it in a healthy way. So that's all I got.
Jazakallah khair, alhamdulillah. Thanks, Sister Saima, for that informative presentation. And now we will start the answer or rather the question and answer session of our webinar. If you have any questions you'd like to ask Sister Saima, please text them in the chat box. I have several questions. How has conflict resolution been unique during the age of COVID-19?
Well, like I said, I think tensions are running high. I think a lot of people are struggling with like all these different kinds of pressures that are out there that we haven't had to face before. Before we could get up and go do our thing, go to work. We have time apart from each other. Kids are off at school, spouses are at work, and we have maybe a few hours at the end of the day to spend with each other. And we really, for the most part, would value those, few hours we had before the next day started. Now, we're kind of together 24/7. We've been like that since March, I think, and so just that, it's nice in a way. In many ways, it's very nice, but in many ways, it's also very difficult. And a lot of families are struggling with that. They're not used to it, especially when if there's families and individuals who already have conflict, and now they're having to spend even more time with each other. What do you do? How do you manage that? How do you manage that for yourself? So I think, with the pandemic and everything going on right now, I think it's something really important to learn how to do and incorporate in our lives.
What if, what if you know you're on the right side of an argument, but the person you're having conflict with isn't budging or listening? How can you resolve this healthfully?
Uh, Agree to disagree. I mean, you can't make anybody agree with you. You can't make a person jump to your side of the argument. You have your view, and if you feel you're right and you're 100% confident in your views, that's okay. You can be that way, but again, respectfully, assertively, you can state that. You can say, you know what, that's okay. You have your view. I stand by my views, and let's just agree, leave it. Are we okay to leave it at that? Try that.
Does it truly take two people to resolve a conflict? I know you were talking about, conflict resolution and things like that, but does it take two people to resolve a conflict?
Well, conflicts are usually occurring between two or more people, right?
Yes.
Now, it could be, there's situations where there's one person who, for whatever reason, letting their ego get in the way, there's other stuff going on in their life getting in the way, which has nothing to do with other people involved or even the situation for that matter. So sometimes it could just take you to let yourself say, you know what am I doing here? Why am I so bent upon pressing an issue that at the end of the day, does it really benefit anybody? Why am I doing this? So you have to kind of think about, be introspective and say, what's going on? Why am I behaving or reacting in such a way? What's going on with me? And that's where that ownership piece comes in, and that, self-reflection about, like I said, if certain people, if they say, well, I tend to, get into conflict a lot of the time with people. Okay, what does that say about you? Why is that happening? If you're getting into conflicts a lot of the times, like I said, it's normal to a certain extent, we get angry and upset. But if it's happening too often and too intensely, then there's something else going on. So sometimes it could just take that one person to identify where the conflict is coming from.
That's a good one. If one person in a conflict feels like they're always the one backing down or resolving the conflict, how can they manage not feeling so discouraged to act again?
Right.
Because unfortunately, we think that, winning a conflict is, proving that you're right or your side is right. So how can a person manage that?
So you're asking if they feel like they always have to win?
Well, no, if they're always the one who is resolving the conflict, always the one who feels like they're backing down because they're not winning, they're not, proving their point or getting their point across to the other person. So
right. So that's where I think, that it's never truly resolved then, because if they're feeling they're backing down, then they're not really getting their point across. They're giving in and not feeling that they were heard, not feeling that what they needed in that moment was addressed. So it's going to stay there. They might say, okay, they might stop the argument and say, okay, fine, you win, let's move on. But as soon as something else happens or another trigger happens, it's going to come right back up. So it's really learning how to, be able to express your needs. Like, this is what I need. This is what I feel we need to do to move forward. Can we do this? And, sometimes people just won't get along. It's not like everybody has to get along. Sometimes you won't. And then you have to learn, okay, I can only go this far with this person. I can't go beyond this point. That's for my own sake, learning to, again, set those healthy boundaries for yourself.
When do you know you need to introduce a professional to resolve conflict?
When you feel like when you're feeling like you're at that stuck point, you've reached that impasse and you're not moving forward. All you do is end up it just turns into a fight every single time. In a lot of the relationships that happens. Again, when there's consequences to your anger outbursts, when there's consequences, sometimes people have legal issues, lead to legal conflict, consequences because they get into fights and they have all sorts of legal issues, and so they need to have anger management classes. So those are clear signs that, there's something going on here that I need to seek professional help.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay. Okay, then I'd like to sincerely thank Sister Saima for her important and impactful presentation. And thank you all for tuning in to Family First Center's weekly webinar. Again, make sure that you guys meet us here each week where we will be discussing a different topic every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Jazakallah khair again, Sister Saima.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.